Hey everyone, welcome back to our magical garden. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important things in organic gardening, which is black gold. And yes, you're correct, it's compost. Compost is one of the most simplest, most nutrient-rich food that you can give to your plants. It increases their plant growth and it also restores this organic matter within the soil. It's also free and you can make it right in your own home. When you add this compost into your garden, it acts like a soil conditioner, and the microorganisms within the compost, they aerate the soil, and because of that, the plant grows better and it can fight off diseases easily. As we're using this natural black gold instead of using chemical fertilizers, in a way we're not just only helping our gardens, we're also helping the environment. Now let's talk about the step-by-step process for starting your own compost. So the first thing that you need to have is a container for putting in your compost material. If you're living in an urban area and you don't have too much space, or you're a balcony gardener, anything as small as this container will also do. But I think it's better to have a black color one so that it can attract more heat easier. And also, having a small container like this for your compost is also a good thing because it'll be easier to turn over and mix your compost as well. So this next option is something that we actually did when we started composting 3 years ago. And so basically what we did is we got this very big trash can and we drilled some holes on the side of the bin, and that just basically got the air moving freely in and out. And we also drilled some holes at the bottom of the bin, and that just let out any extra moisture that's sitting inside the bin. When we started composting, we didn't follow any specific instructions. We just added layers of composting material into our composting bin, and because of that, we did struggle a little bit, and we eventually corrected our mistakes. I'll go over those mistakes in the next few minutes, but we eventually corrected our mistakes and we got good results at the end. One small issue that we've seen with this trash can composting is that since the compost is so deep, it's a little hard to turn over and mix the composting material. And so, since we've already started composting a lot more, we realized that we needed to add a second composting bin and also an upgraded version. So our third option is something that we started very recently, which is using the composting tumbler. And we think it's going to solve our very small issue with the turning and mixing of the composting material. As I said earlier, the other composting bin has been working out perfectly fine for us, but I think that when you're choosing the container for your composting, it truly just depends on what kind of lifestyle you're living, the self-preferences that you have, and also how much kitchen waste and how much garden waste we're getting on a daily basis. So our next option is something that farmers with a lot of space would generally do, and they won't use any types of composting containers like we do. What they would just do is find a perfect spot somewhere on their land and just start adding the composting material in layers, and when the compost is ready, they would take the compost from the bottom of the pile and use it in their garden. Now that we talked about the containers that we can use to start our composting, let's move on to the materials that we can use in our composting bins. So the two things that we can generally put into our compost are brown material, which is carbon-rich material, and green material, which is nitrogen-rich material. And these two things go into our compost, and after weeks and weeks of partying with the organisms and insects and worms, they come out as fresh black gold that we can use in our garden. When it comes to the brown material in our compost, we would use things such as paper cuttings, dried leaves in our backyards, or perhaps your neighbor's backyards, stems, bark from trees, things like this. And this is what we call brown material, and this is the main source of carbon in our compost bin. This carbon material helps our compost become fluffy and dry. When it comes to our green materials, we can use things like our everyday kitchen waste, just vegetable scraps, banana peels, fruits, eggshells, those kind of things. You can also use the leaves after pruning your vegetable plants. The green material is the main source of nitrogen in our compost bin. There are so many other things that can go under brown materials and green materials, but I just listed some of the basic things that we can find right around our house. Now that we talked about the things that we can put into our compost as green material and brown material, now let's talk about the things that we cannot put into our compost. The first thing that we cannot put into our compost are weeds and diseased leaves, because if we use that compost again on our garden, then we're simply just bringing those diseases back into our garden. Another thing to be careful about is if we're adding fish or meat into our compost. Although they decompose well, they kind of make your compost smell really, really bad, and they can also attract rats and other types of animals as well. Another thing to be mindful about is if you're adding grass clippings into your compost as green material, and you have to be a little bit more careful, because if you're adding any type of synthetic pesticides, chemicals, fertilizers, those kind of things to your lawn, and by adding those grass clippings into your compost, you're basically losing the whole concept of organic gardening over here. Now let's look into some of the common mistakes that all of us make as beginner composters and how to solve them. One issue that comes to my mind when we're talking about composting is the smell. Me and my sister used to hate it when my mom told us to go put the kitchen scrap in the compost because it smells so bad, and then we found a solution on how to fix it. So one reason that your compost could be smelling really bad is probably because you're adding too much green material or nitrogen-rich material, and a simple way to obviously solve this problem is to add more carbon-rich material or brown material. A simple rule of thumb is that for every 1 part of green material or nitrogen-rich material that you add 2 to 3 times of that of brown material or carbon-rich material. This will help make sure that your compost doesn't turn out too wet or too smelly. And on the other hand, if your compost is too dry, just add more nitrogen-rich material or green material. Now coming on to some of the tips that can help us get our compost done faster. Turning or mixing your composting material about 2 to 3 times a week will help your compost be done faster. If you're starting the fresh compost pile and adding your material into the composting bin, if you can try to add some natural compost activators into your bin, it will speed up the process of decomposition. Some of the things that you can use as compost activators are, if you have a compost that is already handy, you can add some of that into your compost bin. All that nitrogen and microbes in that compost will help speed up your new compost pile to be ready. You can also use cow or chicken manure as activator. You can also find the compost activators in the garden stores. Also, add some water to keep it moist. Another thing is when you're adding your green and brown material into your composting bin, if you break them into smaller pieces or make them into smaller pieces, it'll make sure that they decompose faster and your compost will be done faster as well. Before we wrap up our video, one final thing. If you're using trash cans like this as your composting bin, make sure that you drill holes on the side of the bin and also at the bottom of the bin, just so that those liquids will be released and also for that good airflow. And make sure that you're putting your composting bin in some kind of a lid or some kind of a bin, so that when your compost is being made, the liquids that are released will be collected in some kind of a lid or bin, and you can use those liquids back into your compost or in your garden because they are very, very, very rich with nutrients. Now coming on to how do we know when our compost is ready. So you can all just basically look at your compost. If it has like that dark brown or black color, you know that it's ready. And also it should get that sweet, earthy smell that we all love. And you should also see all the things you put into your compost. They should all be decomposed and you can't even find them anymore. See how fun and simple it is to make compost out of the things we can find right around our house? I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making this compost. See you all in another video. Until then, happy gardening.